What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, going through the latest Detroit Lions news. And today, we got some free agency talk. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to another video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, man, we are back with another free agency video, man. It is right around the corner, and the news continues to pile in, and you could expect more videos like this. Now, this one's going to be much more expanded than just the news, because it'd be a very short video if that was the case. I wanted to add a little bit more to this. Plus, I wanted to talk about these guys anyway, so it just makes sense. But we'll start with the news first. Detroit Lions tight end Brock Wright, who is a restricted free agent this offseason, former undrafted free agent. Brock Wright, the Detroit Lions have placed the right of refusal tender on Brock Wright. So it gives the Lions a lot of leverage to getting back Brock Wright this offseason. Really, the only leverage that Brock Wright would have to go elsewhere is he could just not play, but the Lions would still have the rights. Or there's the other aspect of he can go in free agency, talk to other teams, and if someone was willing to offer him more money, the Detroit Lions would then have the opportunity to match that offer, and if they didn't, he would be a part of that team. But with the Lions placing this tender, he will not just become an unrestricted free agent. It gives the Lions a lot of leverage to getting Brock Wright back this upcoming season, and that number is set at $2.985 million. So I'd be a little bit surprised, honestly, if there was a team willing to offer much more than that, but I guess you never know. He just doesn't have a lot of receiving production, so I think it makes it hard for there to be a ton of value there. The promising aspect to Brock Wright is that he's very dynamic in the sense that he plays a lot of different spots. Line, slot, wide. He lines as a blocker sometimes. He was in the backfield 15 snaps this past season. He's a very young tight end still as well, of course, now just coming off of as an undrafted free agent. But then he also plays a lot on special teams. And for the Lions, as we've seen now early in the free agency process, they value guys that play on special teams. We've seen that. And I also will bring this up before we start to talk about that a little bit here, is that some of the potential rule changes to special teams that could take place, they may or may not, I don't know, but they could incentivize definitely the kickoffs being more so involved in the NFL. Apparently only 22% of kickoffs were returned this past season, which is crazy, but it definitely sounds pretty accurate. That could absolutely change with this new idea of having a kickoff range, like the target range they have to kick off into, where if it's just a straight touchback, they get at the 35-yard line, unless it bounces through the target range and then goes into a touchback, then it's at the 20. So it's kind of like incentivizing teams to kick it off in a specific range to have kickoff returns. So I think when we talk about special teams and the value of punt coverage or field goal block, and some of those you're kind of like, they don't, what do they really do? I mean, we really block any field goals? Not really, right? Not that often. Or you talk about punt teams, like, okay, Brock Wright, right? We saw this past season kind of in like a little bit of a new role, lined up at left tackle at times for us on punt teams. So he was kind of in some of those punt coverage activities, which a year ago we didn't really see from Brock Wright. So he kind of expanded some of the arsenal there on special teams, but he's consistently been utilized on special teams. I think that is important because not only do they value special teams, and they really look at it as this is the third phase of the team, and it's impacted games a ton. And we've talked about this in a previous video, so I won't go all the way back down that route like with Jalen Reeves-Maybin, but there is value there. And if the kickoffs start to become more so involved, again, that's another area where he plays for us. He's part of that front line on kick return for the Lions, but then also even kickoff coverage, where we didn't see him much, but we did see him a little bit, like against Chicago Bears, for example. So maybe that'll be something that's more so into his role, but that's just something to kind of keep an eye on. Also, they're talking about changing the onside rules, where it's like, okay, you can't do an onside until the fourth quarter, and you have to be trailing, and you have to declare that you're doing the onside, but you can be unbalanced formation-wise, so you can give yourself a better chance. I get it. I don't love the fact that I can't do it in the first three quarters and that I have to be trailing in the fourth quarter to utilize it. To me, that's crazy. I think the idea of, surprise onside kicks are amazing. I don't know how many players get injured there. Maybe there are. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like that many, because usually when it's a surprise onside kick, no one's expecting it, and just either it works or it doesn't. I love that. I think it's a very valuable asset to be able to utilize the surprise onside kick, especially when you feel like you're outmatched. We utilized it heavy in our first season with Dan Campbell as our head coach. I hate the fact that that could be taken away, but we don't know. These are just proposed rule ideas. The fact is, special teams has value, especially for the Lions, but also could have more value, especially on the kickoff team going forward as some of these rules come into play. But he's also, of course, had value offensively for us. I mean, again, he's more so of a blocker that aligns in a lot of different spots. And when you talk about kind of that fullback position, that's a spot that Brock Wright can align, especially as just a lead blocker. We saw Malcolm Rodriguez do it this past season. Of course, that's Ben Cabinda in the past, but no longer being under contract. This is a role that he could play. And having Brock Wright back, if he does come back, this is essentially the Lions' same tight end room all rolled back. James Zylster back in the building. You'd have Brock Wright. You don't necessarily have a lot of guarantees there, so these guys could still be, let go, or they still could be cut. There could be ways out of their contracts. They're not, locked in. But you do get a lot of that room back with James Mitchell, Sam Laporta, and they like these guys. They like them for special teams for for sure. It's a receiver. While he's not a dynamic route runner, a lot of his routes were kind of like level 1, but we did see him utilized on some of the, he's not like a complex separator where it's like, let me get some in and out cuts and things like that. Let him go get open. That's not his strength. He did show pretty reliable hands. He had one drop this past season a year ago when he had over 200 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns, a 145 pass rating when targeted. It was 117 this past year. He had 3 drops, but he's made some big time catches as well. I mean, my favorite one was like the one-handed grab on his shoulder, which is like, what? That was Brock Wright? He's made some good grabs, especially down the field. He's just not a separator as a receiver, right? That's not his role, but he is a guy Lions like as a blocker. And speaking of special teams and that impact, it sounds like the Lions are trying to get a deal done to bring Anthony Pittman back as well, the edge defender now, wearing the number 57. I don't know why I threw that in there. For some reason, it just popped in my mind. Hey, he wears 57. Let me say that out loud. There you go. He wears number 57. But just a quick little side note there, probably, again, very special teams heavy player. Like, this is a guy that's played over 1,100 snaps on special teams for the Lions, including, I believe it was 360 this past season. He basically plays on every single team as a special teamer for the Lions outside of field goal kick. He's not out there to block and kind of just create a wall, and that makes sense because of his size. So, again, probably not going to be a big deal if that does happen, but that just shows you how much the Lions value their core special teams players, and if they feel like you're part of that group, they want to bring you back, as we've seen. The Lions have also announced that they are going to be re-signing exclusive rights free agent Zonovan Knight, so I would assume it's the tender to the exclusive rights free agent deal, which, again, no guarantees, minimum contract. So, again, you could easily get out of this contract. It's essentially like a futures deal in a way. With that being said, again, not really a big shock here necessarily. Keep an eye on Craig Reynolds. I haven't seen anything there, but I could have missed it. But Zonovan Knight being brought back, I think it makes a ton of sense. This is a guy that we expected to be brought back when we did our Bleacher Report shows. Like, yeah, I think Zonovan Knight's going to be part of that. Didn't really do much for us this past season. He did have 3 carries for 13 yards. That's 4.3 yards per carry. Just didn't play a lot. Did a little bit of special teams role as well. Kind of stepped in for injuries. But this is a player that, based on what he's done in the past, I thought he was a good running back. We did kind of a breakdown when we initially signed him. So Zonovan Knight being back into the mix does make sense because, again, there's really no risk to it to add more depth to that running back room, add more competition to that running back room. I thought it was promising when we signed him initially from what he had done in the past. Didn't really see a ton of this past season, but it's good depth from that sense, and I think it makes a ton of sense to get him back into the building just for some more competition. We start to hit in training camp and those kind of things. So the news is kind of just pouring in right now, so I wanted to get this other quick update in here because we're going to talk about the cornerback. The Detroit Lions have decided to not place tender on exclusive rights free agent Chase Lucas, which means that he's going to become an unrestricted free agent, meaning that he's very likely going to end up with another team next season because there's really no risk to the team to just bring the guy back, and there's no negotiation. You just bring the guy back on the minimum. Lions deciding not to do that. Khalil Dorsey's also becoming a free agent. We know that they didn't place a tender on Jerry Jacobs. Seems like the Lions are moving on from those cornerbacks, and we're definitely going into rebuilding this cornerback room this offseason, and it seems like Chase Lucas is no longer going to be with the Lions. Now, I wouldn't count out a potential practice squad. He lands back with us at some point, but it seems like right now the Lions are definitely going into rebuilding that cornerback room, and we're seeing that take place. So with that, now let's move on to talking about some potential free agent options, and the first player that I want to touch on, we're going to spend the most time with this player, is going to be Jonathan Greenard. Now, this was a guy that, of course, you probably heard of him. Statistically speaking, he broke out this past season. I wasn't sure how I was going to approach kind of the edge rusher position in terms of, I've looked at a lot of these guys, some more than others. I have a pretty good sense of a lot of kind of the top edge rushers, but also a lot of kind of the under the radar options. Anthony Jennings, of course, Josh Uche, same team. Jennings is such a darn good run defender, just doesn't do much as a pass rusher. I got a pretty good sense of a lot of the edge defenders in this class, but some of the top guys I haven't really dove into, like Danielle Hunter. I've dove into Danielle Hunter, definitely back at the trade deadline too, so I have a good sense of Danielle Hunter. But a guy like Jonathan Greenard is one of those players that I kind of overlooked, right? He's one of the top of the market, seemingly edge defenders this upcoming season, coming off a career season. And out of just nowhere, Rad texts me, Jonathan Greenard. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, what the heck is this? I was like, maybe I missed some text message. Let me open that up. No, that's it. It was just his name. And I was like, yo, let me check the guy out. So this was one of those guys that I really haven't dove into yet, especially at the top of the market at this position. And him texting me that, I was like, dude, we should do a video on this guy. Like why not do a video on this guy? Just talk about him. And when you look at the numbers, I feel like I'd be doing it a disservice to not at least bring him up, because I'm sure there's been a lot of chatter, because there's always chatter about pass rushers, but especially a guy that's coming off of 14 sacks according to PFF this past season. there's going to be chatter there. So because of that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do a video, make a video, I'll put him in it. And then we get the Brock Wright news. It works out perfectly. And then also another guy that I'll just kind of touch on it next. But most of this, we're going to talk about Jonathan Greenard from the Houston Texans, the 26-year-old defensive end. They're 4-3 front. Defensive end, the right side defensive end. That means he consistently lined up against a left tackle, which just in terms of fit, I mean, you just talk about lining up with Aiden Hutchinson. It's like, okay, that works, right? A lot of times, sometimes you deal with tight ends, sometimes you wouldn't. But he's lining up on the left tackle. So Hutchinson, who typically lines up against other teams' right tackle, it's like, all right, perfect. That's natural for him. It'll be natural to kind of sync those two guys together. So that makes sense. Then when you start to dive into the player, there's a lot of things to like. I didn't really know what to expect in terms of the way that he won. I knew the numbers were fantastic, but when you see those numbers and you don't see like a lot of the projections of like by far he's going to be one of the highest paid in free agency. PFF projecting 4 years, $19 million per year, which yeah, it's absolutely a lot, but that kind of puts him in like the Harold Landry kind of conversation in terms of money per year, or like Von Miller, who just restructured his contract, or even a little bit lower than Trey Hendrickson, who had 20 sacks by the way this past season, which is insane. But it doesn't put him at like the top of the market of edge defenders, especially with where the salary cap is gone. So you wonder a little bit about that. Like, why is that not the case? And he's really well known as like, man, he's a big effort player. And you see that when you watch him. So I'm intrigued, right? We talked about Andrew Van Ginkel. I'm intrigued. I'm like, let me see it. Now, this is much more of a pure defensive end, pass rusher, upfield player, not as much dropping into coverage like Van Ginkel did with Miami. I really didn't see like any reps of him dropping into coverage from the 5-6 games that I went through. So keep that in mind. But as a rotational defensive end, that was typically their starter at defensive end. Here's what I took away from this player. Well, statistically speaking, we'll start there for his first 14 sacks, as I touched on, 9.3% run stop rate, which was 8th amongst edge defenders against the run, 48 total pressures on this past season. Now, to put this into context, it wasn't a ton of pass rushing reps because there was a rotation there, and he would likely have a rotation here as well. Even though he's getting paid big money, he'd still probably have a rotation. Maybe you don't want that. Then, in context, 48 pressures, according to PFF, on 405 pass rush snaps, could be compared to Charles Harris, who in 2021 had 52 pressures on 447 pass rush snaps. I just think that's somewhat comparable. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about the numbers. Sacks look great, but I'm not like a huge sack guy personally. Like, the numbers are awesome. I love guys that can finish on the play. That is a skill. It is a skill to be able to finish. But I like the pressures. I like guys that just are disruptive all darn game long, because I've seen it. If you can't cover in the back end, you're not going to get sacks. We saw it this past year, and it was like, why is Hutch not getting sacks? And it's like, well, dude, we have to be able to cover the first guy. The first guy's open. It's going to be hard to get a sack. You could be completely unblocked and still not get a sack if the first guy's wide open. Anyways, whole side rant. Let's talk about Jonathan a little bit here. Starting off with the first step, and this was the area that surprised me the most. Athletically speaking, you talk about a guy that's listed at 6'3", 263. Also length, and before I even knew the length, like how long his arms actually were, when you just watch him, you're like, man, his length seems to be an absolute problem. And yeah, he's measured in at just under 35-inch arms, which, hey, length on the defensive line, always a good asset to have, especially with edge rushers, has brought up a ton. Not necessary, but it's a good asset to have. With that being said, though, first step, one of the best traits, if not the best trait for me in the categories that I break down and grade, of his game. And it's not that he is the most twitchy edge defender that you'll find, or maybe the quickest edge defender, but what he has is excellent timing off the ball. And this is a skill set. It is the ability to time up the snap. He is consistent. Now, the biggest issue that he will have here is that occasionally he'll kind of lean a little bit, and he'll start to kind of anticipate like the cadence, and he'll start to kind of lean on top of it, and then his get off is a little bit weird. But the consistency in his first step and the get off, the depth that he's able to cover, which is pretty good, he has excellent timing off the ball, and it's consistent. It sets up everything. He's explosive through the hips, off the line of scrimmage, so he can be explosive on first contact. That sets up everything for him as a pass rusher. You will see wins that makes you think that you're watching a guy that's playing against college tackles at times, because he will directly just run past offensive tackles. 3 different games, I watched him directly just run past an offensive tackle because of his get off, his first step, and the tackle was not getting enough depth quickly enough to match it. 45 degree, wasn't getting out there, and he just ran around the edge. That is the kind of first step that you're talking about here. So that alone, it's a skill set, especially as a pass rusher. And that's an area where he thrives, sets up a lot off of that. Now, pure pass rusher, I like him here. Don't love him, but I like him. All right, now, I think he's much better of a pass rusher than just the idea of, oh, he's just an effort guy. No, this guy can win. He has ways to win. Obviously, he plays into his length a ton, and he's a little bit more of kind of your speed to power type of rusher. What stands out with, there's just not a lot of inside wins whatsoever, and we'll talk about a little bit more with agility and kind of the stunt work as well. But as a pass rusher, he has ways to win, and he can win. And one of the biggest issues issues that I do have is I don't think they played many good tackles in general this past season. Just go look at the teams they played. There's just not a lot of good tackles they played at all. When I look at that schedule, I'm like, oh, man, this is really Titans, Saints. I'm like, this is really bad. But in fairness, the guy can win. He won against different tackles. He won against good tackles. He beat Ronnie Stanley. Like, the guy can win. He has ways to win. So we'll start there first. Long arm move. Now, what I like about the long arm move specifically is that it plays into his strength, which is the length that he brings. Also, the first step as well, where he could just drive and walk you back. But also on top of this, an area that I didn't expect that was going to stand out was deflection. You look at his build, I'm thinking this guy might be a little bit tight. You think a power rusher, but he's got real flexion to his game, and it opens up second effort wins. It opens up when he kind of stalls out, when he's able to kind of reset late and then get to the quarterback, and you're like, how do you do that? He's very balanced in the sense that he has really good flexion. Knee bend at the top of the rush. It opens up contact balance. Now, I don't think he's great working through multiple blocks. Chips, I think, were just an absolute disaster for him, to be honest. We'll talk about that more in a second, but I do think this is a guy that showed real contact balance at the top of his rush because of the bend that he also brought, and that opens up capable wins on long arm. He can get knee bend, ankle flexion, drive, and walk you back into the pocket, and he does have hip explosiveness to create real torque on contact. I don't think he consistently gets his hips into it, which can be an issue where he's kind of just leaning and then he's falling over, but when he gets his hips into it, there's real force that he can get there at the first initial point of contact. With that being said, though, it will die out. I think for a couple reasons. Number one, he loses leverage. He doesn't play with outstanding leverage throughout his pass rush. I think there's a lot of instances where it's okay, but it's not great. He's not getting complete sink or bend into it, or he's not flipping his hips and getting real charge into the point of attack, and because of that, he'll kind of die out in some of those long arm moves. But it is capable, it's effective, and if that first punch is on point, he can knock a tackle back a couple yards, and that's all he needs because of his length and his range. He can then disrupt the passer and just get his arm in the pass lane just in general, and then you tie in some of that flexion that's there. I think he has below average pure bull rush strength. Again, a lot of that to me is he doesn't get as low consistently through the entirety of his bull rush, but he does have a stronger upper body, which can be effective. That is a big part. Posted over 20 bench press reps coming out of the draft. Also, back to kind of the flexion aspect, stop-start wins. This shows up against short setting offensive tackle for sure, but it's also the ability to get up on a tackle that's short set, stop at the point of attack, and then work again that second effort rush. And to me, against one guy, but to me, that's again where you see kind of that bend, show up the ankle flexion to kind of redirect, slide off the block, be a little bit slippery. Then you start to get some of the rip-through moves or the ability to create half-man and kind of push him back and push the top of the rush, push the shoulder back of the tackle into the quarterback. He's one of these guys that were very effective against teams like Baltimore with a mobile quarterback. He was very effective in those, not because of just the effort and the pursuit and the closing, length and range that he brings, but also because of his pass rush style. He naturally kind of keeps the pocket collapsed. He wins on the edge mostly, but he collapses the pocket by the way that he wins. Very effective at playing half the man, working the top of the pass rush, and then, like I said, elite length, which is huge as well for kind of that late separation. I also love his ability to kind of slow play offensive tackles. I think instinctually with his footwork, it's pretty good. His ability to read an offensive tackle, set up different moves off it, you'll kind of see him start to slow play, then you'll kind of see him skip through, rip through, and it's like, okay, there's some craftiness there, and it's really the footwork that's able to sync with an offensive tackle. This is an area that I do like him, is that I don't think he has the deepest pass rush arsenal. I don't think there's many inside pass rush wins there, but I do think that he has the footwork and the recognition and just the pass rush awareness to kind of slow play a pass rush and be able to beat some of the kind of those short setting looks. I also think that he has a little bit less pass rush nuance in terms of beating those, specifically in terms of winning off the edge like that, but he does have the footwork to kind of play it a little bit differently and set up a little bit differently. One of the best aspects of his game is the vision. He has very good football vision. He has a nose for the ball, as we talk about. He's another one of these guys, and it's why his production looks like it does. Again, he has pure wins on his own, so I don't want to make it sound like everything he does is effort, because it's not. It is a big part of it, though, but it's also a skill set. He has good vision on where the football is in the pocket, and he can redirect his pass rush route to get himself into a position to get a hand on the quarterback. He's very, very good in that category. I know he has some of the agility of other edge defenders that we talked about where they can just plant sink and then redirect back inside. I don't think he has that necessarily, but he does have his pretty good vision, and he can direct his route for that. The issue becomes kind of the counter pass rush move, the second effort rush move, and we'll talk about that. So when you talk about second effort pass rush move, where I think he stalls out is getting any kind of power rush wins. Speed to power power initially can be effective. Second effort speed to power is just not there. It stalls out to me. He loses leverage, doesn't get the same knockback, and it kind of just dies off. It then turns into being able to kind of hold his ground, find a quarterback, and then late with some of that agility and some of that flexion to kind of reach himself back to the quarterback, or maybe get an outside win with some of the quickness, but less so of being able to create power on a second effort setup. One of the best things that I think that he does as a pass rusher is he's got a really subtle kind of lean and shoulder dip into the top of the rush. So we talk about getting your hips into it so you can really kind of dry back an offensive tackle at that point of attack. And what he has a very kind of late sell, and I think this is one of the best aspects of his game. He's got a nice little late sell where he can press with the long strides, the great get off, but then right before he gets into contact, he can kind of give you that shoulder lean outside and the tackle can open, and then he can dip himself, and then when he gets his hips into it, he can drive you back into the pocket. That's one of the best little subtleties of his game as a pass rusher. It allows him to open the door for a lot of wins, and he's very disciplined to sell that, pressing off the offensive tackle very strongly, not giving a lot of space before contact. He can press right up to the point with some flexion and then dip into it and push, and he can get some pop back to the quarterback. Also, I think there's a lot of instances where he doesn't consistently sell it that you would like. I don't think he's as sudden as a pass rusher. We'll also talk about that with some of the lateral agility as well, because while he can cover a lot of depth, I don't think he's super sudden, right? Some of the setups look also super unnatural where he's kind of just jolting back and forth before he just punches inside. He doesn't give a consistent inside pass rush threat outside of it being schemed up to crash inside or loop around inside. It's more so just the aspect of he doesn't give you a lot of inside pass rush wins just in general. And for me, that can kind of come back to bite him a little bit, is that he doesn't consistently always sell to an offensive tackle like, hey, I'm going towards the edge, let me open up your chest and get inside. Even though he has that little subtle shoulder movement, I don't think he consistently sells that. Also, I think he has real issues against dealing with two blocks. So I thought when tight ends were chipping him, when he'd have to deal with something first and then go to something else, that I thought stalled out his entire rush. It was very difficult for me to find consistency in terms of even if it was just a tight end. Yes, multiple offensive linemen, yes. So when you saw him stun inside, like he could get by the first guy, and then it was like the inside move, there wasn't much of a plan. But then also, even just a tight end chipping him. And I think one issue is tight ends just hang on him too long. Like, I would like to see him discard a lot faster. But once he does get off the block, because he's very capable, he's tough for a tight end to stick with because he's long and he can drive. And he also usually comes in with pretty good leverage. But the issue then on top of that, the flip side, is that the second pass rush effort that he gives to an offensive tackle once he gets past tight end, there's not really a good plan there. He kind of just bulldozes himself into the tackle, but there's not a lot of nuance set up off it. And I thought that was an issue, is that anytime they would chip him, it kind of took him off his pass rush plan. And there was some games like Denver, for example, it was like, we're just going to put a tight end over there. Now, the benefit for us would be that you would think it's like, okay, well, if that's what you have to do to slow him down, depending on who the team is, and you flip it around, you say, well, Hutchinson on the other side, and that means that we're not going to put a tight end over there. As a defense, you're thinking that's great, because either you're going to have to put two guys to help out on both sides, or you're going to leave him one-on-one, or you're going to leave Hutchinson one-on-one. And in theory, that would be amazing. So kind of gives you, in a way, some a difference in terms of the style to win than a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, right? James Houston gives us that. James Houston gives us crazy bend around the edge. He's very twitchy, very quick, and he's kind of like the outside pass rush winner. This guy gives you more of kind of that long arm, bull rush. He fits into what we like, length, but he brings it at a much better first step while also being able to get some crafty outside wins, more so than Josh Pascal or John Kaminsky, who can drive you back, but don't give you a lot of nuanced wins around the edge. This guy can win that way. So he does give you a nice little offset opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. He would. Counter pass rush moves, I think a lot of things stall out. The first pass rush isn't there, it can kind of stall out a little bit. Now, moving on to kind of the run defensive side, and there's things to like, things to not like here. You talk about hand usage a little bit. I think one thing that's very true is he plays very fast hands, which I love. Ready hands, fast hands, drive and length. It's difficult for tight ends to kind of deal with, especially against the run as well. Now, I do think that he could be hit and miss in terms of his initial hand placement against tackles. Sometimes I don't think it's kind of, you see some of the violence there where he's like attacking a tackle. Instead, he kind of just throws his hands, and then it's like, all right, he got swiped off it. It's fine. It's not always consistent, though. Like, okay, I'm going to drive you back with this initial punch. I don't always see some of that, like, initial violence as a run defender, consistently setting the edge, sometimes even the entry angles. He consistently gets towards the edge, which is good. He consistently gets to where he wants to get to, but at the same time, I don't think he consistently ties his hands well with it, and then he doesn't really have much of a grasp, but he ultimately resets, and I think a big part of that is, again, the flexion, the length is huge, but then there's also usually pretty good leverage that he comes in with. Straight up just setting down on the edge, he creates a really strong base, nice wide foundation at that initial point of attack. The issue is, again, his hand placement can get a little high. I do like as a run defender, backside pursuit is there, vision to the ball carrier is pretty strong, and I think he's pretty instinctive as well in sense of he can read an offensive line scheme. He sees the tackle pull away, and he's like, oh, he's going that way, let me slide over top. I don't even know if he's Andrew Van Ginkel level in terms of his pursuit. I don't see that, but I do see a guy that was able to diagnose what was happening and get on top of a play in pursuit. I did like that aspect, his ability to seemingly read the offensive line.
It can be very slippery to kind of navigate through traffic. Here he is against two tight ends on this play, and you're going to kind of see it all. You see explosiveness off the line, you see the wide base, you see some of the agility, the flexion on the play as well to kind of stay through some of the contact, sniff out the ball carrier, try to use that length kind of effect, force the cutback.
I thought his hands got the most kind of messy and also this showed up with kind of his base too. The base is pretty consistent against tackles, but if he's working upfield and say, here comes a pulling offensive lineman or here comes a tight end warping around, is that his base can get real skinny. He doesn't really set into it that well. He kind of just throws himself. A lot of times he's just like picking inside or outside, but he's not really like settling himself down and really taking on the block cleanly. Kind of gets pushed out of the play. I think taking on oncoming blocks is way worse than taking on an offensive tackle that's setting on the edge. But overall, I think he's a plus run defender. I think he's above average in this category. I don't think he's great here. I think he's above average, but a lot of it can play into pursuit for sure. And then again, the ability to kind of reset length. He's got a lot of the natural traits that helps him a ton against the run. In terms of just agility, it's kind of a weird one because to me, laterally, he can cover a lot of depth. It's a real aspect in his game. It makes him effective as a stunt player just from that alone, and also as a slant rusher. He also is sufficient in terms of his lateral quickness, where if he's lined up as a 6 technique, right, he's right over top of a tight end starts to slide away, he can step in front of that, usually get in front of the gap, not get caught from behind. So he's sufficient in that sense, though the first step can be inaccurate, right? He can press the field and be like, I'm caught behind on the play, but it's sufficient. Where I think he lacks with agility is while he can cover depth, I don't think he's the most twitchy or sudden player with some of the agility. I don't think he's the most fluid either. There's a lot of instances you talk about going through a chip block or kind of slanting inside where he feels like he's stumbling over his feet a little bit. He doesn't seem to be the most agile in that sense, and also the most fluid, kind of working laterally specifically. I just don't think he's super sudden. I don't think he's super crafty or crispy in terms of like plant. Like you don't see that. It's a lot more like, oh, he can get wide, he can cover a lot of depth, he can slant inside, but there's not a lot of craftiness that opens up some of that pass rush towards the inside. As I said, coverage, I didn't really see him do much there specifically. I do think that he has good closing bursts. It's fine. It's not like elite. It's not like James Houston, but what he does have is really good range. So he can kind of launch himself as a tackler, backside of runs, kind of reach out, just find a running back, grab him, pull him back down. Then again, he's always giving good effort wins, but also his pass rush path is very clean to find the quarterback, shortest path, shortest distance to the quarterback consistently, and also on top of that, because of his length and his range, he can usually get his hands on the quarterback, and then he just plays with big-time effort. We talk about the hand use. Laterally speaking, he does have a nice variety in terms of he's not limited in terms of the hands. Like, he'll use swim moves, he'll use some of the rip moves, he'll go over the top. He's pretty nice in terms of syncing the lateral movement, whatever he wants to go to. Here's an offensive tackle. He's trying to get up my chest. I can slide off of that, but then also syncing it with the proper hand usage, and then also, again, some of the flexion to kind of keep himself clean, stay balanced on the play. He's pretty good at doing that and opens up, again, some of the contact balance to work through contact and continue to win rather than the contact balance of super fluid. Like, I don't see some of that. He'll kind of stumble a little bit. So overall, was this a player that I watched and I took away and I said, hey, I would pay him the 4-year $19 million? Not necessarily. Now, that price point isn't crazy. I don't think I would love that price point with Jonathan Greenard. Would I be open to signing this player? Absolutely. I would absolutely be open to signing this player. I think when you talk about the age, I think when you talk about what he would be opposite of Hutchinson and the skill sets, the way they could offset, you would probably have to find in our defense, ways to play him in some of that Sam Backer role when you want to play, 4 down defensive linemen. You want to have your front 7 out there against a team that's in 12 personnel. You'd have to find a way to put him on the field and mix roles, I think mesh roles together with hey, Josh Pascal's out here this snap. We want to put you both on the field together. You have to find a way to make that work, and for him, he may have to open up some flexibility in terms of coverage dropping ability. If you feel like he can sufficiently just drop into the flats to the point where Bruce Irvin could do it or Julian O'Core could do it, if you feel like he can do that, or Charles Harris, if you feel like he has enough in the tank and you feel like that's a role that he could be part of while also on just 4-man fronts, if you just want to put him out there and be your consistent DE end, I think this guy could be very valuable. The issue issue is you have to, I think, find a way to sync him and a Pascal together, because Pascal's part of the future. It's a second-round pick, legitimate investment. He's part of the future. So if you put this legitimate investment in this defense, you have to find a way to be able to play together. They can't just always one or the others on the field. To me, that's two big investments that you're just rotating. That's not going to be good. So if you can find kind of that other role for him, I think he'd be valuable. He'll always be out there on pass rush downs, and he did show flexibility to kind of move around, though I don't think he's a consistent inside the tackles, in between the tackles type of winner. And I think that's okay. We got a lot of guys that can win between the tackles, so he can offset that. So I think to our skill set that we have, I think he does offset, and he also at the same time plays into what Aaron Glenn wants to contain. I think he plays into today's NFL as a pass rusher extremely well. There's a reason his sacks are where they are. It's not by luck. It fits. It fits today's NFL. A lot of mobility. You have to be able to contain. He does it at a very high level. Like the player, I think he fits in that sense. I think personnel fit, it'd be a little bit like we kind of have to figure this out a little bit. I don't know if it's pure, but it could work. It absolutely could if they feel like it could. I could understand this signing absolutely 100%. To see where the price point fell with this player, but if the Lions signed him, would I say it's a bad signing? Absolutely not, because I can get the buy-in. But on the flip side, am I in love with the player where I'm like, yeah, I would do it, no questions asked? No, I'm not there with the player. I think he's a good pass rusher. I think he's above average run defender. I think his first step's incredible, but he doesn't stand out elite in those areas to me. So to me, I'm not blown away to the point where I'm like, go sign this guy. I don't feel that way. The thing that I do want to add to this when we're talking about a guy like Jonathan Greenard, we're about to talk about a cornerback really quickly here, but when we talk about what is the needs, right? In my need list, I put cornerback at number 1. That hasn't changed. To me, cornerback is still the biggest need for this team, even after adding Emmanuel Mosley back into the mix. And I may be higher on Emmanuel Mosley than a lot of people out there. I think he's very capable of being a good starter in the NFL. I think he's got a lot in the tank. I think he's our most talented cornerback. We just got to get the guy healthy. So I like Emmanuel Mosley a ton. Obviously, there's the injury side of that as well. However, I think it's very clear, and this is what I want to make clear, is even when I said in that needs video, while cornerback is my top need, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be addressed with that has to be the biggest free agent signing, or that has to be the big trade, or that has to be your top draft pick. Not necessarily. However, when you look at the cornerback position, it is a spot where the Lions haven't really made a legitimate investment in the draft. They just haven't. Brian Branch was their only cornerback drafted outside of Ife Melifonwu, who played that for 1 season, and now he's a really darn good safety. Put an investment there in the draft. When you look at the top defenses in football, I mean, for the most part, a lot of them similarities, they really have good corners on the outside. Maybe they don't have like your number 1 corner, not all of them. The Jets do. They have 2 really good corners, which is rare, but they also have one of the best defenses in football. Kansas City, young corners, some of the best cornerbacks in football. Alice, Deron Blandon, and also Stephon Gilmore this past season. And yes, they have the association of a really good pass rush with that. So I'm not saying that that has to be your biggest investment. I'm not saying you couldn't put more money to an edge rusher. You probably will if you went and signed both in free agency because of just where that price point is. But I will also say this. It's to me very clear how impactful cornerback is. I don't think it has to be our biggest investment because we saw, like I brought up when Jerry Jacobs was here with Jeff Okudah and we just had solid play at cornerback. Our defense statistically against the pass was really darn good. Completion percentage, touchdown interception ratio, yards were like the biggest issue. Outside of that, we were really good pass defense. I know that it can get there schematically because they're willing to adapt. They change cover schemes by game. They change them by season based on the personnel they have. But they do need to make a legitimate investment at that cornerback position because it's one of those spots that they just have not hit on. I had a guy in Aiden Hutchinson who had over 100 pressures this past season, 101 total pressures by PFF, and he had 11 sacks by PFF. Now, that's not all on, like, sometimes you get a pressure and you're not really in a position to get a sack, but it does speak to how important it is that you have to be able to cover in the back end. And this is what it was early in the season when he wasn't getting sacks. We're like, what's going on with Hutchinson? It was like, well, no, he's still playing pretty darn well. He's still winning. You just have to hold up a little bit in the back end. You have to get him beyond the first read. And there was a lot of instances where we could not get quarterbacks beyond their first read. We need help in the back end. So let me make that clear. I don't think that the Lions need to invest in going and paying another huge edge rusher opposite Hutchinson. Would I be on board for it? Absolutely. I think it'd be nasty to have 2 really good edge rushers. It'd always be great to continue to upgrade those spots, but I don't think they necessarily need that. That's why cornerback is top, because I think they need to get cornerback help. So they could do it. They could go pay a big one and then go draft a cornerback and they could both connect and you're like, boom, Emmanuel Mosley's healthy. He starts. He's a good corner. That could work that way. But in just terms of how I look at it, we need cornerback help. You can't have a guy with 100 plus pressures and 11 sacks. He should be way higher than that. We have to be able to to cover in the back end. So to me, that's my number one emphasis. I just want to kind of make that thing clear, is that to me, you got to have corners. We have to improve the cornerback position this offseason. That continues to be my top need for the Detroit Lions. Not saying it has to be their biggest investments, but that's to me the top need. And the L'Jarius Sneed thing, we talked about him in our cornerback video, so go check that out because I'm not going to break him down here. But L'Jarius Sneed and the Lions being interested in that player, to me, does make a lot of sense. He's unique. He's young. It's not a big injury past. He's played slot, played outside. There's flexibility, and he's coming off of a great season. He's also very unique in just terms of his build and his athletic skill set, and then also the blitzing nature that he has in his background. He's unique in that sense where it feels like a guy that would not shock me if Brad Holmes was going to pull a trigger and make a big splash trade that maybe people aren't expecting, that he would be on that timeline for something like that to happen. Because to me, it's not the same as Jalen Ramsey, but there's similarities to when they made that big move with LA. This one's a little bit different because it's a tag and trade, and he's not at the Jalen Ramsey level necessarily, but it's similar in the sense of this is a young cornerback that's coming off a really good season. A lot of guys become free agents because they're hurt or they're a little bit on the other side or they had a bad season. This guy is not that. He was tagged for the reason to trade him. So it would not shock me if something like that happened, and I would be on board with it. Another player I just kind of wanted to touch on, and I feel terrible for this. I do. Anybody that watched the cornerback video, I appreciate it. But as soon as I uploaded that thing, Tre'Davious White was released by the Buffalo Bills. And I was like, oh my goodness, I would have put him on this list somewhere. I absolutely would have. And, you know, you're getting big veterans released. Justin Simmons this morning. We may have to talk about him at some point. But Quandre Diggs. Tre'Davious White is a guy that I dove into instantly. And here's the thing. I'm not going to be breaking news by saying that this guy's hurt all the time. That's the reason he was cut outside of the money as well, which is he's only played 21 games in the last 3 years, 10 in the last 2 years, and this past season started the season, and then he was hurt. That's been the issue for the 29-year-old cornerback because he just hasn't been healthy. With that being said, when you watched him, if I'm just going based off of it, and it was unfortunate because this past year he played 4 games, had the Achilles injury. 2021, he had the ACL injury, which led him to missing games in 2022. We've seen that take place with our cornerbacks. And when you talk about having Emmanuel Mosley back, it feels unlikely that the Lions would sign another guy that's kind of in a similar boat. It's like, hey, you just signed Mosley. Why would we get another guy that's kind of in the same exact situation? Doesn't seem to make a ton of sense. However, with that being said, he's probably looking at a 1-year deal type of market, I would assume. The thing that Tre'Davious White has going for him, and I think Emmanuel Mosley can be a starter in the league. You know, you guys saw my video on that. But the flip side is I think Tre'Davious White, what he has going for him, if you just based on what you saw last year, don't even go back years, just last year when he was healthy, if you get that player before the injury, that was a guy that's a really good corner, like at 29 years old, at 5'11", 192, the former first-round pick. And I'll just give you some of the notes that I had on him because, to me, very versatile cornerback, played in a lot of different coverage, diverse schemes defensively, but at the same time, he's still one of those guys that kind of throw back, be a press corner, be effective. And to me, he just checks a lot of boxes when you watched him. He was really good against Miami, which I absolutely loved. I also really like his build. He's got a pretty nice physical build, which can be very effective for run support as well. Again, it's just the injuries for the most part. In the press, though, very bursty transition when he opens, and that's a huge aspect for a lot of the press corners you see coming out. Some of them, they can't really explode out of their stance. He can explode out of his stance. Really nice footwork to kind of just mirror off the line of scrimmage. Very good footwork, like top-tier footwork from what I was able to tell. Fast depth when he's needed, right? So if they try to press him right off the line, he can very quickly get depth. I love this footwork at the line of scrimmage. Now, where I thought he was lacking, recovery burst, especially in man coverage, did not seem to be there. Felt below average to maybe even worse than that. The recovery burst just did not seem to be there. I also liked, quick and switch man responsibilities as well. The way that he would pace himself with the release. He was a very technically sound press cornerback. Hand usage, the physical style that he would play with. His lateral movement was above average. This was a guy that is a press corner. Technically, he was sound in a lot of categories. I just didn't think some of the recovery burst was there. So off-man coverage, maybe not an area that he wanted him to live, but again, there was a lot of flexibility within his coverage style. I like him as a press corner a lot, especially a guy that can press and drop into cover 2. I like that. But with that being said, off-man coverage, I don't think he's as twitchy. To change the direction, didn't feel as twitchy. It's really good in half-turn coverage. So darn natural in half-turn coverage. The pacing that he played with, ability to just ride the hip of a receiver and stay in phase throughout a route. Again, the acceleration I thought was below average, which I didn't love. The other aspect I like from off-man coverage is that he was very balanced and he did a really nice job staying square at the top of the route. It allows him for an easy sync, easy transition ability. And then in zone coverage instinct showed up, depth feel showed up, really good feel for route depth where it's like, okay, they're setting up layers here, bam, 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 and he was able to to get depth and then kind of float into the correct layer. Fast in cover 2, transitions, kind of open up his hips quickly, get into position. Oh, here's the route concept. Go flat. Okay, let me flip over to the flat. Very fast in those transitions, and he had a really nice sense for playing the sticks as well. So the awareness was all there. Really good cover 3 depth. To me, from what I've seen, I haven't went through, every game that he played this past season, but going through a few of them, this was a guy that 16 bench press reps, physical build. This is a good corner. Like, if you told me, hey, you're getting the guy from the first 5 weeks last year, I'd be like, sign him. The thing is the injuries. That's the issue. It's just that the guy has injuries, and are the Lions willing to add that with what we have? I would say no. I would be shocked if the Lions added Tre'Davious White. I don't expect that to happen with adding Manuel Mosley. But with that being said, if you were asking me from a talent side, like from just what I saw last year, and who knows how he comes back after an Achilles injury, if you just asked me from what I saw last year, can the guy be a starter on the outside? 100%. He was a very good starter before, of course, having the injury. Athletically speaking, didn't blow me away, but technically he is sound. He's got ball skills. I like him a lot. This is a good cornerback. So the fact that you don't have to give a draft pick is intriguing too, but it's the injuries. I wouldn't expect it. With that, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Prop, for watching. And